Thank you so much. We are streaming now. Thanks.
Thank you. If one of our attorneys are on, is there anything we need to do to, because we weren't streaming the entire time, is there anything we need to go back and capture for the public? How about I just do that anyway?
Randall?
Yeah.
Chair Randall, this is Rob Dickerson.
Hey, Rob.
Hi. I think if you want to do a quick recap, the only action
how
items
about
that
do that?
you did were
Sure.
the two members, the
Absolutely.
residents, and then move
Thank God
forward.
we weren't, good job, Margaret. We weren't too far into the meeting at all. And so we just had two action items. One was the adoption of the need to conduct the meeting by electronic means, and one was the, and that passed unanimously. And one was the minutes of approving the minutes from the May 13th meeting. That passed with one abstention, Mr. Faust, because he was not at that meeting. And now we're on to item number 5, which is the presentation that we're on right now. So thank you. All right.
All right. Can you hear me again, Chair Randall?
We can hear you.
Great. Margaret, onto the, yeah, great. With all these major headliners, we wanted to explore data, local data, to show impacts that are specific to Northern Virginia. Next slide, Margaret. So we compared 2020 and 2021 data sets and compared them with corresponding weeks and months in 2019. So in all the charts in this presentation, 2019 is our baseline. And we wanted to utilize data sets that are consistently updated and widely utilized locally. Our approach is similar to other regional analysis or other similar studies, but once again, this is specific to Northern Virginia. And also we have showed both highway and transit data side by side. So in the next couple of slides, we will look at highway numbers, followed by transit ridership, and then we will look at some more recent trends after we stopped or after our study period. Next slide, Margaret. So this is the first of 2 highway slides. In this chart, we are showing percentage changes in traffic volumes on freeways and major arterials in Northern Virginia. So right after the stay-at-home order, back in mid-April 2020, there was almost a 50% reduction in traffic volumes. Traffic volumes have been trending upwards since then and almost stabilized to a level about 88% of the pre-COVID condition. So on this travel data, we have access to hourly data and other periods of the day. But since historically, congestion had shown to be high or higher in the evening rush hour, we have shown PM peak data to show the largest impact. So with this decrease in travel volumes, we have observed increase in travel speeds. Next slide, Margaret. Similar to travel volume, on travel speed, we have seen the maximum increase right after the stay-at-home order, mid-April, early April 2020. And then the trend has stayed, or the speeds had been staying faster than the pre-COVID baseline on this chart, with some few exceptions, with sharp lows due to traffic events like construction work zones, crashes, weather events, etc. On these travel metrics, I have 2 observations or 2 points to make. Number one is these travel volumes or travel metrics, they show all vehicular travels. That includes both personal travel and freight movements. In a September 2020 without presentation, Margaret, can you go back to the previous slide? Previous one, the one before. Yeah, so in a September 2020 presentation, VDOT presentation to CTB, we have observed truck travel trips did not reduce as much as personal cars. So, and also the freight activities overall nationwide have been recovering better than personal travels, also, and very close to pre-COVID condition. So that freight activity may have influenced the overall upward trends on the roadway travel volumes. We need to check data more to dive deep onto this. And also another thing is this analysis does not include neighborhood streets. So any rise in e-commerce and related increase in home deliveries will not or may not show up in these charts. My second observation, and I think more importantly, is although there was a decline in peak hour travels, similar analysis in TPB have shown us there was an increase in midday travel trips. So instead of the traditional 2 rush hour peaks, there had been gradual midday and early afternoon buildup of traffic. Again, we did not investigate that with travel volume data, and something that we hope to look in the next analysis. So these 2 charts show the highway trends. Now onto the transit side. Next chart, Margaret. So this chart shows percentage changes in daily transit ridership for all transit providers in Northern Virginia. Note that for transit, we have data up until March of this year. So this is a busy chart. I would like to point to the bottom 2 lines, which show VRE and metro rail services, and the top 2 lines that show the local buses. And as we can see, local buses did not dip as much as the rail services. And also they had been recovering faster than rail services. One caveat on this chart, it only shows the demand side. But after the pandemic, we have all observed that most transit providers have reduced their services as well. So with this slide shows all our highway and transit data analysis. On the highway side, we have watched or we have analyzed up until last month. With transit, we have checked data until March of this year. And onto the next slide, we will look at some more recent trends. Next slide, Margaret. So we have all been watching the news. There are fewer number of COVID cases, more adult population getting vaccinated, and this region, as the rest of the nation, is opening up. With this increase in economic and social activities, there had been also an uptick in travel activities. In our last check, highway volumes were at 90% of pre-COVID condition. On the transit side, we've been tracking or checking media coverages and other outlets. So WMATA general manager had been cited to say Metrobus is at 50% of ridership, and Metro Rail is still at 20% of pre-COVID. And to support this recovery, in anticipation of upcoming ridership, a number of transit providers already have started full services or planning to start. VRE has started from last week, its full service. WMATA board just today approved good substantial increases in services and reduced fare. Other local transit bus service providers, mostly at 85% of pre-COVID service level, and some have started actually full service like Fairfax Connector and Q. So we will continue to monitor the impact of these changes in the upcoming months. Next slide, Margaret. And this trend analysis, we hope to help our upcoming transaction planning update. We have started the kickoff of transaction this last March. Specifically, this trend analysis can inform our scenario and sensitivity analysis assumptions. Also, we just hope to show or display general and emerging travel patterns coming out of this pandemic condition. With that, Chair Randall, I conclude my presentation, and thanks again for the opportunity.
Well, thanks. I know I have so many questions. I might just send them to you later because I just said let's try to keep the meeting moving along, but that was really helpful. So I'm just going to go down the line, see if you have questions. Chair Wheeler,
I'm good.
Member Crystal,
No questions, thank you.
Mayor Wilson,
Nope, no questions.
Mr. Faust,
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Rome,
No questions, Madam Chair.
Mr. Meyer,
I have no.
Mr. Snyder,
No question.
Ms. Watts.
Request, if we could have an update at each of the next two meetings, this would be very helpful given how dynamic our situation is.
Yeah, Ms. Boysko,
No questions, thanks.
Ms. Richel,
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Burke,
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Younger,
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Horsley,
No questions.
Mr. Hines. I'm sorry, Ms. Hines.
Mary Hines, no questions, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Kolb.
No questions. Thanks a lot,
Did I-
Bill.
Did I miss anybody? I was doing that kind of from memory. Did I miss anybody? Okay. So I think I'll save my questions because of the request that was made by Ms. Watts to do this at the next meeting. I would actually, if there's any forecasting of what we're going to see going forward, that might be really helpful. The fact that the metro ridership is so far down under the bus ridership is really interesting and disturbing. And I kind of want to flesh that out more to find out if people are not riding metro because they're just not fully back at work yet, or if they're riding, or if the peak hours are off as it was before metro yet. And I see you, Katie, but maybe some of the other hours, recreation hours are kind of gone up some. So I think that would be interesting. I also like to know where the bus ridership is higher, where that's located, but really just trends what trends do we see going forward as we really emerge from COVID? If we have any forecasting, I'd love to see that as well, because so many of the decisions we have to make are going to be decided by forecasting. And truthfully, I don't know if we'll ever get back to where we were pre-COVID, but where we're going to land is going to be determinant for so many decisions. So, Ms. Crystal, I imagine an MBT. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. MBTC,
Yes.
you've seen some of the stuff also. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. And so I think we could get with the staff of the commission to share some of the analysis they've been doing. Nobody has a crystal ball, of course, but they definitely, in answer to your question about what's driving the return or in fact lack of drop off of bus relative to rail, they've definitely done some analysis about that, based, as you might expect, on the demographics of riders and where they're taking those two different modes. I also just heard from our Metro board members from Virginia that they have been doing some roundtables with major employers in the region to help kind of forecast when folks are coming back to work and on what basis. So again, no promises of a crystal ball, but they may have some good insights on that we could bring to the authority.
Really curious to see that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right. Thanks everyone, and I like this idea of seeing updates again in the next couple of meetings.
And Madam Chair, if we could add to your list a year-to-date monthly comparisons so that we know what degree tourism is an issue as far as metro riders.
Okay. All right. Do you get all that? Wonderful. Thank you. All right, we're going to go to our first action item of the evening, which is the call for regional transportation projects for the FY22 through FY27 6-year program, which that happened fast, didn't it? So we're going to go to Mr. Jasper.
Thank you, Chair Randall. Good evening, members of the authority. And yes, indeed, it did go fast. It was less than a year ago that you adopted your fiscal 2020 to 2025 program. And we this evening, we're seeking your approval to post the call for regional transportation projects, as you say, for the fiscal 2022 to 2027 six-year program. This program will be your sixth funding program and the third iteration of your six-year program. And as such, it's becoming rather mainstreamed and, dare I say, normal. And we'll follow a similar approach to previously with respect to things like eligibility, governing body resolutions, the overall project selection process, project evaluations, both quantitative and qualitative, public engagement, and hopefully schedule as well. This will be the last six-year program to use the current transaction project list that was adopted in 2017. It will also be the first six-year program to use the new transaction model, which is currently under development for transaction and will be available in the fall. We have provided a refresher briefing to your staff on the process and the detailed how-tos with respect to submitting applications. And we are additionally asking applicants to consider MBTA's core values when submitting their applications, the core values being equity, safety, and sustainability. Subject to your action this evening, we will post the call for regional transportation projects on July 1st, allowing us 2 to 3 weeks just to go through our final preparations. And on July 1st, we will then open the online PIMS application portal for your staff to begin submitting or preparing applications to submit. If all goes well, we'll be seeking adoption of this six-year program in July of next year. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Chair Randall.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I would just, so this is just a call for action. So call for projects. We're not doing anything. We're not putting any projects in anywhere, just calling for a project. So this is the start of the process. So I will just check and see if anyone has any questions. Hearing none, I move approval of the call. Oh, was there a question?
Yeah, Chair Randall.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, so my question on this would be basically, I know for a lot of us who have projects, especially those of us in Western Northern Virginia who have projects that we submitted for Smart Scale that are not going to be approved from Smart Scale, that basically the way Smart Scale is going right now is they're asking the MBTA more or less to kind of pick up the slack for them, especially for some of these major projects. And a lot of those projects aren't going to have been on our transaction policy that we have for the MBTA. And I know, one of our chief operating mechanisms here is that we prefer our projects that we are going to fund in those projects to be on transaction. So I just want to make sure that we have that avenue cut so that we can both update transaction to include some of these projects that we had submitted for Smart Scale, while at the same time be able to put out those call for projects that include some of those Smart Scale submitted projects that didn't make the cut this round.
Ms. Backman, do you want to, or Mr. Jasper, you want to respond to that?
I can respond. Certainly, if projects are already in transaction, that there'll be no issue. And if projects are not in transaction, then we will certainly work with all of our member jurisdictions and other eligible bodies to ensure those projects are considered in the current transaction update.
And Madam Chair, very brief follow-up.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
When is that next transaction update going to be? Just so that I know that for the timeline. So if I'm asking Manassas Park or VDOT, for example, to submit a project, and it needs to still go on a transaction, when do they need to submit that paperwork to get it on transaction so that it can be considered for the next round next year when we actually are, deciding which projects to fund?
Yes, thank you for that question. We really need that information immediately. Although transaction will not be adopted until approximately November of 2022, the process is such that we need to start finalizing the details of the projects that will be tested within a transaction. So as soon as that information can be provided to us, the better that would be to streamline the process.
Thank you.
All right, so I'll make the motion, and any other discussion we can have in the motion. So I move approval of the call for regional transportation projects for the FY22 to FY27 6-year program update.
Second, Delegate Rome.
Seconded by Delegate Rome. Discussion on the motion. As the motion maker, Delegate Rome, what you just said was really interesting and something that, you kind of said the quiet part out loud as far as the SMART scale. And the way you presented that just now, let me just ask you, has somebody actually said out loud that because we have MBTA that we're going to be less likely to get SMART scale money in Northern Virginia, or is that an assumption that's being made? Because the way you presented it, it sounded like that was something that's actually said.
So, Madam Chair, the way I would respond to that is, I said that based on the data. Look at what happened in round 3 of SMART scale. Look what's happening in round 4 of SMART scale. The western jurisdictions of Fairfax County, Loudoun County.
I'm not arguing with that I believe it's a thing. I just wanted to make sure because the way you presented it, if someone wasn't listening or didn't know the data, they may have thought that somebody literally said that, and that would be a thing if somebody said that. And I just want to make sure, I was just trying to clear that up.
Well, Madam Chair, I said it, and if anyone has any any response to that, I am all ears and happy to listen.
Okay.
Chairman.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Hines.
I guess I'm a little puzzled down, Delegate Rome. Northern Virginia gets a good 20–25% of the money. That's the same amount of money we've been getting all the way along through all of these rounds. I understand people's frustration with the fact that the smaller, less expensive projects are scoring better, but the legislation requires us to look at the cost benefit. So I really think it's a mistake to say that the rest of the state is getting money we would get, or that somehow we're being disadvantaged. In terms of how the money is actually divided, I don't think that is true. I do think we have an issue with the cost of our projects. We have an issue with the cost of right-of-way. We have an issue with the cost of underground and utilities up here. And those are real, and we've been working on them the whole time, but nobody's taking money away from us.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, one more response, and then we're going to go on, and if anyone else wants to talk, so go on.
Sure. So, Madam Chair, just what I would just say regarding that is, I think SMART scale statewide right now is only receiving about 1/7 of the amount of money from the General Assembly that it really needs in order to actually accommodate the number of project requests that come into it. So it's certainly not just a slack on terms of state money going to other regions. I understand, obviously Northern Virginia gets its allocation that's based on the funding formula that comes out from the state. So I completely understand where you're coming from on it. It's the approval of the projects from round 3 and what's going in round 4 now, where Prince William County last round got 1 project, as the 2nd largest jurisdiction, and this year we're getting 1. Loudoun, I think, is getting 1. Fairfax County is getting 1. And so, we have our work cut out for us in the General Assembly to make sure that we are fully funding, transportation as we did with HB 1414 to a better extent. But we have our work cut out for us to do a lot more. And I know that, the MBTA is a component of that. And so we have to just consider that as rounds 3 and 4 are coming and going.
All right, so we're going to go on. Does anyone else have any comments or questions on the motion? All right, is anyone who opposes the motion, please speak up. All right, then that motion will pass unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Jasper, I appreciate it. We're going to move on to the next action item, the approval of resolutions to policy number 23, the electronic participation in meetings. Mr. Longi.
Thank you, Chair Randall. This update to the policy is generated from action in the 2021 General Assembly related to virtual meeting presentations, and it would be effective July 1st of this year. Basically, what the policy does is committees will still, authority meetings and the committees will still need to have a physical quorum present at the advertised location, which is typically the MBTA offices in Fairfax. It applies to participation in authority committee meetings, and they are counted separately. I bring that up because there are basically two reasons or two purposes for attending a meeting virtually. One is a medical or personal emergency, and there is a limit to the number of times that you can do that. The other is a medical or disability, permanent or temporary disability. There is no limit to the number of times you can attend a meeting virtually. But again, the meeting must still have a physical quorum present. The policy goes into break down those two. It is pretty well detailed out. Members who want to attend a meeting virtually will need to contact the committee or the authority chair. Obviously, MBTA staff would be willing to assist the chairs with that. And they'll need to give the reason so that we know which one of those two categories it's in, and let the chair know the location that they will be attending from virtually. Again, the counts are different or independent of each other. So if a member serves on two committees, as many do, there's a count for each one of those committees, plus a separate count for the authority meetings. And with that, the markup was attached in the packet, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
And I will say, don't call me and ask me because I've missed all of you. And so if you tell me you want to attend virtually, I'm going to tell you no for the July meetings because I want to see you. So I'll make the motion. I move authority adoption of the changes to policy 26, electronic participation in meetings as delineated in the attachment in the attached draft to be effective July 1st, 2021.
Second, Watts.
Motion made, seconded by Ms. Watts. Discussion on the motion. Wonderful. Hearing none. Does anyone have any opposition to the motion? Fantastic. That motion will pass unanimously. Now we have to do the first reading, the first required reading of the bylaws correction. Ms. Backman's title we've been saying the wrong thing for a long time. So we've changed it in the bylaws, and the bylaws require, I think, 2 readings. And so we're going to do the first reading right now. Mr. Lungi, do we need to actually do the reading or just have it in the text?
Just in the package. I mean,
Okay. Yeah. In other words, everyone can read. So cool. So I move authority approval of the first of 2 required readings to amend the MBTA bylaws as noted in the attached draft. Need a second?
Second, Watts.
Seconded by Delegate Watts. Discussion on the motion? Wonderful. Hearing none. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Fantastic. Fantastic. That motion will pass unanimously. Item number 9 of our action items. Am I in the right place? Yeah. Item number 9 of the action items is the approval of the reallocation of highway infrastructure programs, HIP funds, regional surface transportation funds for Loudoun County. Ms. Backman.
Madam Chair, I would just note that Loudoun County is requesting this approval of the reallocation of them, what we call HIP Highway Infrastructure Program funds. Back in February of 2019, the authority approved recommendations for the allocation of $4 million in HIP funds to the Route 50 intersection improvements project from the Centerville Road to Stone Springs Boulevard, which was jointly by Fairfax and Loudoun counties. On May 27th of this year, Loudoun County, which was supported by Fairfax County, requested approval of the transfer of $2.6 million in HIP funds from the Route 50 corridor improvements projects to the Route 7 George Washington Boulevard overpass project. Loudoun County previously obligated $1.3 million to this project, but will not be able to obligate the balance due to the obligation deadline, which is September 30th of this year, because Loudoun County has to acquire some right-of-way. So the authority approval is requested to transfer the same amount of RSTP from the Route 7 project to the Route 50 corridor improvement project. And I know I just said a mouthful, but essentially what's going on is a swap. So
Yes.
at the end of the day, the transfers will enable VDOT to meet the obligation timeline requirements and successfully use all of the HIP funds. The total funding amount for each project will not change, only the total funding types.
Right, exactly, exactly. So I'll make the motion and I hope Ms. Burke is still on to second the motion. Mayor Burke, I move the approval of the reallocation of Highway Infrastructure Program, HIP funds, and Regional Surface Transportation, RSTP funds for Loudoun County. I think that motion is going to be seconded by Mayor Burke.
This is Senator Boysko, I'll second it.
That wonderful. Thank you, Senator Boysko. Thanks you very much. Appreciate that. Discussion on the motion. Wonderful. Does anyone oppose the motion? Fantastic. That motion will pass unanimously. We move to item number 10, approval of the programming of additional RSTP funds to the transfer of HIP and CRISA funds. I think we're talking, I don't remember who's going to actually give this update. Is it Shri?
Mr. Namford Theory.
That's what I thought. The doctor, right? The doctor was going to give that one. Ready when you are, Shri.
Thank you, Chair Randall. Yes, so in April, we came to you because due to some of the federal action on transportation funding, and earlier this year when that action happened, the extension for the federal funding, they didn't really increase any funding over the years. There was a flat projection. But if you remember, we work with VDOT to get those projections for the 6 years out of the 6 years of the 6-year improvement program. And we work on the last year of that 6th year or the 6th year of that 6-year improvement program with the jurisdictions to fund RSTP and CMAQ funds for that fiscal year. But because of the flat projections, we had to reduce some of the funding we thought we had, and we worked with the jurisdictions to effect those changes in various projects, CMAQ as well as RSTP. And you approved that, or you recommended those changes to CTB back in April. Earlier in May, we came to know that we got some of that funding back, about 20 million in RSTP back, coming back to the region. In addition, you just talked about HIP funds in the Loudoun County project. In addition to the 20 million RSTP, we also got another 20 million in HIP funds, HIP CRRSA, that is a coronavirus response and relief supplemental appropriation funds to our region. So we have about 40 million to program for various projects. And the reductions happened in April was about 60 million. So we are not filling the full loss, but we about 2/3 of that hole can be filled with these additional funds. So we worked with the jurisdictions to see which projects can have these funds. The HIP funds, again, as you remember, it has deadlines on obligation as well as spending. So we looked at various projects, and Route 7 widening in Fairfax County is already under construction, and it can use that 20 million within the next couple of years when the obligation has to be made. So we can, so the NVTA staff suggestion is to allocate that 20 million of HIP funds to Route 7 widening in Fairfax County, and swap that 20 million with the RSTP funds the project already has. So essentially, the project will have the same amount. It's just swapping one source with another source. So that 20 million in RSTP can be added to the additional 20 million we just received. So we will have 40 million of RSTP going back to the jurisdictions under various projects. We worked with the jurisdictions and jurisdiction staff and came up with a proposal that is attached to this memo. With this, as I said, we have about 40 million being allocated to various projects in the region.
Wonderful. Any questions? If not, I'm going to go to somebody from Fairfax to make that motion. Mr. Faust, if you're on, or anybody from Fairfax might want to make this motion.
I'm happy to move approval of the proposal.
Mr.
Boysko, second.
Wonderful. This is Jennifer Boysko can do this because she represents more than one county at a time. So that works perfect for her. Motion's been made by Mr. Faust, seconded by Senator Boysko. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none. Is anyone opposed to the motion? Wonderful. That motion will pass unanimously. And then the last action item we have is number 11, approval of endorsement for Arlington and Prince William counties and the Virginia Railway Express applications to the U.S. DOT for rebuilding American infrastructure with sustainability and raised grant applications. And this is going to be presented by Ms. Backman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you noted, Arlington and Prince William counties and the Virginia Railway Express, they're requesting authority endorsement of their raised grant applications. The raised grant applications, I guess, is formerly known as Tiger and Build. So they are requesting endorsement. Arlington County is seeking endorsement for their Arlington National Cemetery Wall Trail. The cemetery wall trail will construct a 10-foot wide pedestrian and bike trail on the west side of Arlington National Cemetery Wall Trail. Prince William County is seeking endorsement of their Old Bridge Road, Gordon Boulevard intersection improvements and Prince William Parkway, Minnieville Road intersection improvement projects. And both are, of course, priority projects. And all of these projects are in transaction. Virginia Railway Express, they're seeking endorsement for a planning grant for the L'Enfant Station and a fourth track. The L'Enfant Station and fourth track project includes the planning, design, permitting, and construction for an expanded VRE L'Enfant Station and an additional mainline track between Virginia and the L'Enfant interlockings in DC. Again, all three of these projects are in your long-range transportation plan transaction, and the application deadline is July 12th at 5 p.m. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're not cutting that one too close. Woo. Discussions. Are there other questions to Ms. Backman?
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd be happy to make the motion. I just wanted to gently note there is a little bit of a typo in the cover memo, and I think maybe perpetuated in Ms. Backman's comments, which were otherwise excellent. We do love our bike and ped infrastructure, but we are not proposing to build it through our nation's most hallowed ground. That bike and ped trail is proposed on the west side of Virginia Route 110, not of Arlington National Cemetery itself.
Thank you, Board Member Chris.
No problem.
That might have been an issue if we had done that. That might have been an issue.
not trying to offend any veterans who may be joining us or who served our country and made the sacrifice.
Are their families, or the country, you know.
So if I don't know if others have questions, but otherwise, Madam Chair, I'd be delighted to move that we endorse these projects from Arlington, Prince William, and the Virginia Railway Express for their raised grant applications.
Okay, Ms. Wheeler, would you like to second the motion?
I would love to second that motion. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Sounds good. Wonderful. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. Does anyone disagree with the motion? Wonderful. That motion will pass unanimously. Fantastic. Those are all of our action items. And normally that's the hardest part of our agenda. Tonight, not so much. Tonight, the discussion items are going to could take just a minute as well. So the first discussion item is the Governance and Personnel Committee report, which was a fairly a short report. Mr. Longi, help me out with this in case I get it wrong. As it turns out, when we talked about having going out to the Commonwealth Department of Human Resource Management to look at the comparator of salaries for Ms. Backman, and as it turns out, they didn't have any positions that were comparable, so we couldn't use that. And so the next decision that we have to make is whether we want to go on the RFP to contract with a private organization or company to do that work for us. And the decision of the GPC committee is we did, for a cost of $20,000, and that when we ask for the RFP, it would be as Ms. Backman's title as a CEO and not an executive director, since that is her appropriate title as CEO, and see what they come back to. And the amount of money is, 20,000. Mr. Lungi, did I miss anything in that?
No, I would just add to it, Chair Randall, that the Commonwealth certainly has comparable positions, but because of the way their compensation is determined, the state agency didn't have data for determining the compensation.
Okay.
They were very helpful, but they just don't make that determination, so they didn't have resources that they could help us with.
Wonderful. Thank you for that correction, for that help with that. All right, so that was really all. Do any of the GPC members want to add anything else, or did they have anything else? Wonderful. Hearing none, we're going to go on to item number 13, was the Transportation Planning Board Visualize 2045 update and proposed resolution for alternate build scenarios. It's possible some of you may have received an email or two about this issue over the past, couple of weeks. This has been an interesting item to discuss, and it's been discussed across numerous regional bodies. And so I actually asked Ms. Backman to give a little bit of a background on the TPB and how it interrelates with MBTA, because for any newer members, I was thinking of Ms. Davis Younger. I just want to kind of level set everybody before we talk about the issue, just kind of make sure everybody knows, what the TPB is and why we're talking about it. So I asked the staff to do that, and then we'll talk about all the other issues that we'll go to Mr. Snyder actually and talk about all the other issues that relate to this discussion item. So Ms. Backman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the National Capital Region Transportation Planning Board, which is the official name, is the federally designated metropolitan planning organization for our region. The TPB, as we call it, is responsible for developing and updating the region's constrained long-range plan, which we call the CLRP, and which subsequently has been called Visualize 2045. And they're responsible for conducting the air quality conformity determination for this plan at least every 4 years. The current Visualize 2045 plan was adopted by the TPB in November of 2018, and this plan is set to expire in December of 2022. So the TPB has initiated the update to Visualize 2045, and as part of this update, in December of 2020, the TPB did adopt the Visualize 2045 update technical input solicitation, which requires a reduction in vehicle miles traveled and associated emissions in Visualize 2045 to achieve new interim greenhouse gas reduction goals and new climate resiliency goals. Now, having said that, at the same time, the TPB is in the process of undertaking the climate change mitigation study. They started this process in April, and they are scheduled to complete this process in December of this year. Last month, on May 19th, the TPB did receive from a board member a request to consider a resolution that looked at the TPB, or that I should say required the TPB to conduct an alternative air quality conformity analysis alongside the one the TPB is currently conducting for the long-range transportation update. If you will note, at their June 16th meeting, which is next week, the TPB is scheduled to take action on Resolution R19-2021 to approve the project submissions for inclusion in and the scope of work for the air quality conformity analysis for the 2022 update to Visualize 2045. So again, they did receive a request from a board member to do an alternative scenario to the current update, if you will, that they're being asked to take action on, or these projects that they're being asked to take action on for inclusion in the air quality analysis. And I will note that resolution was distributed in your packet. As of yesterday, that resolution was revised, and we will get to that a little later. But I wanted to note that both resolutions will be on the TPB's agenda for their June 16th meeting. So the resolution R19-2021, which asks the TPB to approve the project submissions for inclusion for the scope of work evaluation, will be on the agenda. And the substitute, or I guess I shouldn't call it a substitute, but the alternate or revised resolution submitted by the TPB board member. This revised resolution does several things. Number one, it asks the TPB to undertake some scenario analyses and some sensitivity analyses parallel to the air quality conformity update process. I will note that in talking to TPB staff, they are stating that they really don't have the resources to do this concurrently. They said that takes time, and it is a resource issue. And I should note again, the current long-range plan is set to expire in December of 2022. The concern with the TPB staff not having the available resources to do what is being called the alternative build scenario is that if the TPB cannot do the federally mandated process, it puts our long-range transportation plan in jeopardy of lapsing. And if that plan does lapse, there are some consequences to that. A failure to have a federally approved and updated plan and the Transportation Improvement Program and the associated air quality conformity analysis by December of 2022 could trigger a series of federal actions that would impact the local, regional, and state transportation agencies, including project development and implementation. The other consideration, if you will, is with these alternative scenarios that are being asked, or in the resolution that's being asked to run concurrently, there is a question, if you will, regarding what happens to the climate change mitigation study that the TPB is scheduled to complete in December of this year. Having said all of that, I did reach out to Mr. Shrikant, the Transportation Planning Director at the TPB, because I had questions regarding how the TPB's action could potentially impact MBTA. Given that MBTA is not a member of the Transportation Planning Board, but we are a primary funding entity of the regionally significant projects in Northern Virginia, and many of which are in active stages of implementation, it is important for us to understand the potential impacts of the proposed alternative build scenarios on already adopted projects that the authority has funded in advance and any future projects, given that the authority's mandate is to reduce congestion. And again, under this mandate, as you all are aware, we have funded over 100 multimodal, regionally significant projects. We fund transit, we fund roads, we fund the WOND trail. We are truly multimodal on what we advance. So having said that, the MBTA staff, we will continue to coordinate with the TPB staff and other relevant agencies as MBTA member jurisdictions and with our member jurisdictions, so we can understand and report back the impacts of this alternate build scenario on projects that we have funded and that we will fund in the future. So we did include some questions, and we did send these questions on to the Transportation Planning Board staff regarding the potential impacts for an alternative build scenario. I only included 4 in your packet. I had a whole lot more, but I just wanted to keep it high level. And one of the questions is, will the TPB create a new process to determine the selection criteria for the alternative build scenario? Because in the alternative build scenario, they're saying, look at a different set of projects, pull some of the, and it says omit or remove, reduce the scale and reduce some road projects from this scenario. So one of the questions that we have is, will the TPB create a new process to determine the selection criteria for the alternate build scenario? Or will the same process that currently is used be utilized in trying to build out and scope the alternative build scenarios and the sensitivity test? Another question is, can a project be deleted from the plan if it already has a contract in place. You know, several of these projects, they're mega projects. They have several steps that they undertake: PE, design, right-of-way, construction. And what that means is not all projects are fully under contract at any given time. So if a project is under contract for a certain phase, if you will, does it create any potential legal issues, contract issues? And what are the impacts to MBTA on our funding programs if this is determined to be an issue? As FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration requires that regionally significant projects be included in the air quality conformity determination, would the TPB adoption of an alternative build scenario be considered a planning exercise or one in which the TPB intends to implement? Are there any concerns regarding consistency with federal requirements? And again, what is the ability, methodology, and impacts of the TPB implementing such a plan? And the fourth question that we did send to the TPB staff was, since the TPB is not a funding entity and projects in the constrained long range plan are required to demonstrate a reasonable expectation of funding, how will the TPB seek concurrence from project sponsors on their commitment to advance any projects identified in an alternate build scenario? So what I will say, the TPB, they do scenario analyses all the time. This isn't the first time that they've undertaken some scenario analyses. But the question is, if the TPB would like an alternate build scenario to become the plan, we have some of these questions that we think needs to be answered. And Madam Chair, I will pause there to see if there are any questions.
Thank you. That was a very good synopsis to a very complicated issue that's been going on. I think, just in case anyone missed what you said first, that the TPB is responsible for developing and updating things at the national capital region, the national capital level. And so this is not just a Northern Virginia issue. It's a national capital issue. And so we got a letter today from Maryland, and that was sent out. I don't really, seriously, I believe probably in the last week, authority members, you probably have received 3 or 4 different letters and different ideas. So let me just stop, and before I go to Mr. Snyder, and ask, does anyone have any questions for Ms. Backman? And how about I do this, because I have a feeling we're going to have a bit of a discussion. How about I just go down the line on for this one, and I'll first call on Mr. Kolb. Do you have any questions?
I guess the one question I would have, how many regionally significant projects do we currently have in the plan?
So for the TPB's plan, I'm unsure how many of ours that they currently have in the plan, but we do have a substantial amount, because when I say we funded 104 projects, that is really the SPAs. I think we're at 92 projects if we're looking just as standalone projects. And some of this is from our first funding program dating back to the FY 2014 program, which was adopted in July of 2013. So since that time, we've been coordinating through VDOT to get our regionally significant projects sent to the Transportation Planning Board for the air quality conformity determination of analysis.
Okay. Ms. Hines, I'm sorry. Ms. Hines, Mr. Kolb, I'm sorry, do you have a follow-up question?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Mary, did you have a question? Ms. Hines, do you have a question?
Phyllis, I'm just, the question is about, do I have a question about what Monica presented, or do I have a question overall?
Yes, ma'am, about what Monica presented.
Okay, no, I have no questions.
Okay, we'll come back to the other things later. I'm just trying not to.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure it wasn't.
Yes, ma'am, I got you. Mr. Horsley, do you have any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Younger?
Sorry, no, I do not have any questions.
Okay, Ms. Burke?
I don't, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rischel?
Will you be coming back for comments?
We will. This is just for,
Okay.
this is just, yeah, yes, we will.
No
Uh,
questions, thank you.
Okay, Ms. Boysko?
No questions right now, thank you.
Ms. Watts?
Later.
Okay, Mr. Snyder? Actually, Mr. Snyder, I'm gonna come back to you in just a second, and then we'll do comments after Mr. Snyder. So I'll go on to Mr. Myers.
No questions. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Rome?
No questions, Madam Chair.
Mr. Faust?
No questions.
Mr. Wilson?
No questions at this time.
Ms. Crystal?
We're not on the presentation, thank you.
No, okay, and Ms. Wheeler?
Real quick one, sorry. Do we have to take any action tonight? Is sort of a general question from Ms. Back.
This is not an action item tonight.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So let's go on and do the presentation. It's Ms. Back, is Mr. Snyder going to do that?
Well, I would note just in two things, because I failed to omit that one of the or the alternate build scenarios does suggest looking at land use in some of the telecommuting scenarios. I will state that Mr. Snyder has been working diligently with myself and TPB staff to come up with an alternate, or I shouldn't call it an alternate, but a proposed pathway forward in the event that some may be concerned regarding the revised resolution. So, and having said that, we did send out the draft proposed pathway forward. I sent that out to the members earlier today.
Okay.
And Mr. Snyder, I will turn it over to you.
Besides Mr. Snyder, who else on the authority is on the TPB?
We have 4 members on the authority.
Okay.
Who are on the TPB, Mr. Snyder, Mr. Meyer, Ms. Wheeler, and Ms. Rischel.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure. Okay, thank you. Mr. Snyder.
Well, thank you very much. After reviewing the email that listed a number of questions and potential problems with the original draft resolution from the Montgomery County member, I then thought, okay, how can we both prevent delays and disruption to projects which have been approved and are in process, multimodal projects. And at the same time, however, take account of the fact that we do have a climate change issue, that the region has established certain goals, and how can we advance both of those interests. And so I worked with Conti and Monica to try to evolve something that would achieve both objectives. And so that's what I've termed the draft pathway forward. I put it out for discussion purposes and for thoughts that people have, to see if they believe that it responds to the concerns and the questions that NVTA has about the potential delay, if not worse, of approved and important projects, but at the same time commits us, and I think this is important, commits us to finishing the climate change mitigation study that we hope will be concluded by December 2021, and a set of action items after that and dates by which we will look for and work on and ultimately approve projects and policies that will allow us to achieve our climate change objectives as well. So that's pretty much what the effort is, and I throw it out to the group for discussion, consideration, and whatever use that the group views that it has. But again, I want to come back to, as I said in the TPB meeting, I'm very disturbed by the notion that we pit the important transportation, economic development, and other issues against climate. To me, that's an unacceptable conflict, and we need to find a way to advance both. And so I put this forward as a potential way to do that. So thanks much.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. Monica, do you have anything you'd like to present or add? Otherwise, I'm going to go back to the authority members for questions and comments.
So, Madam Chair, the only thing that I would add is, again, the authority, we're not a member of the Transportation Planning Board. This is not a position, if you will. We just have some questions because we really want to understand how TPB action on any proposed alternate build scenario will impact the authority. Mr. Shrikant did receive our questions. It's my understanding that they are in the process of drafting a response. But I will note in conversations that the TPB staff, like I said earlier, they are saying that if they have to do scenarios concurrently, then they are concerned about meeting the 2022 deadline, which is required to have the plan updated. And of course, if our plan lapses, that's, as I noted, a bigger concern for the region. And to just add on to what Mr. Snyder said, as the TPB is undertaking and they're going through the climate change mitigation study, we would like to get that information. For us on the authorities end, that will be helpful to have that information as we are in the process of updating transaction. So that would be beneficial to us as well.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Madam
Okay.
Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Beckman. Okay, I'm going to go through the authority members again, and if you have comments or other questions, and again, there's no action on this item tonight, but yeah, okay, I'll just leave that there right now. There's no action on this item tonight, but I do want people to feel free to be able to kind of have this is when I wish we were in a room, because I think we need to have kind of a more free-flowing conversation, which is hard to do in a virtual meeting room. But I do want all the questions answered tonight, because soon enough, we will have to take votes on things, endorse things, although not tonight. We'll have to. So I'll start again and we'll go through the list. Mr. Kolb?
Are we, just to be clear, are we making comments here, or are we just asking
Yes.
questions of
Yes.
Mr. Snyder?
No.
Okay, yeah.
No, make comments,
Um,
ask questions.
Okay. No, I mean, I don't really have any questions. I mean, I appreciate, Monica, and Councilman Snyder going through this, in detail. I mean, obviously, this is all pretty complex stuff. I think I think the questions are good, in terms of making sure we understand what the potential impacts could be, in terms of, certainly for projects that we currently have underway and where we have contracts in place. I would assume on some of those projects, we may also have federal funds involved. And in the case of something like preliminary engineering, we could be in a situation down the road where those are funds that need to be repaid. So I think there's a lot of questions that we need to make sure we get answered. I mean, this isn't a question, and I think, picking up on Councilman Snyder's point about, pitting economic growth and some of our statutory requirements, the mbta statutory requirements, against climate change, I think, is a false choice. I think we all, know that we need to take steps here on climate change and GHG. And the question is, how do we do it in a way that's, a practical matter, that doesn't undermine our legislative requirements and authorities, and are done in a way that can work, for the MBTA and for the jurisdiction. So again, I appreciate the update on this. And as you said, we're going to definitely have to be monitoring this and maybe having to take actions down the road. So I appreciate the opportunity to comment on it.
Thank you, Mr. Kolb. Those are great comments. I would associate myself with those comments. Ms. Hines, Mary, I lost you on my screen. I know you're still there.
I am here.
There you are. Yeah, there you are.
Here.
Yes, ma'am.
First of all, this is complicated. This process is complicated, but I guess my fundamental feeling is one of urgency, around the impact that transportation is having on the climate. So I share Dave's concern about that, and the concern that I think many in the region feel. I also know that for some people, you know, not doing this right this minute is going to be a problem. But when I look at number 4 on the screen here, I'm looking at that last line, which says, you know, we're going to commit to take actions. And it says beginning with a midterm update in 2024. And I wonder whether it couldn't say no later than a midterm update in 2024. Because if we could do, I mean, my understanding is that the feds will take an update if the region sends one. And this is a mismatch between that climate mitigation study and the timing of this long-range transportation plan. So if we can go faster, I think we should try to go faster. But I also think we want to have reasonable studies that give us some assurance we're looking at all the right things together. And I also think it's fair to say nobody's doing this well yet in the nation. But we've got a lot of flooding issues in Virginia. We've got flooding issues in Northern Virginia. There's a lot of climate change impacts. I just hate to say, oh, well, we're going to take it up in 2024 if we could go sooner.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. I hear that. Thank you. I hear that. Mr. Horsley?
No, I don't have any comments or questions, but thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Younger?
I do not have any questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Burke?
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rischel?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I do have some concerns about both resolutions. First of all, my comments do not mean in any way that I am not in support of greenhouse gas reduction. I understand the seriousness of the situation, but I'd like to, I appreciate the 4 questions that have been sent for answers, and I think that's excellent that we're going to get those answered. Some specific concerns about the resolutions. The resolution quotes public input survey, which is not a scientifically conducted opinion poll for what residents want. Folks who participate in a survey are usually those who are most motivated, not necessarily the demographics that are representative of the region as a whole. So that's a concern. There still appears to be a sole focus on vehicle miles traveled, whereas there are other properties that affect greenhouse gas emission reduction, and I have as yet not heard mention of those. Also, the resolution projects increased teleworking rates, and it uses the phrase possibly significantly so. I would ask what data supports that phrase, considering that we are not yet in a genuinely post-COVID environment. So I would ask that question. As mentioned earlier, I also have concerns, the same concerns Ms. Backman does, that the TPV does not have enough staff to implement the simultaneous studies that are being proposed. So how's that going to work? Also, the resolution still expresses a desire to reduce the number and the scale of road capacity expansion projects. And I have concerns about this on several levels. First, I agree with the comments Ms. Backman made about multimodal. There is no single mode that's going to solve our problems in Northern Virginia. And that's why there is an emphasis on funding multimodal projects. And second, this pits road against transit instead of considering the broader needs of the region. I think in general, I have problems with the resolution. I think it's narrowly drawn. I have concerns because of everything that I have just mentioned. I have concerns about fairness and accuracy in this resolution. And I thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Rischel. Ms. Boysko?
Thank you very much, Ms. Chairman. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Snyder for his hard work on trying to find a reasonable solution to this and a direction. I really appreciate that. We know that the transportation system is in the process of getting changed from a gas-powered vehicles to electrification, which has a much cleaner output. And we know that we have a study that's ongoing. One of the things that I want to make sure is that the plan that ultimately is decided upon is something that we're actually going to implement. What I don't want to see is a very idealistic pie in the sky thing that's going to be put on a shelf and ignored. So I want this to be realistic and obviously something that's going to be effective to help reduce greenhouse gas. I also agree that if we can bring the timeline up, I would certainly like to see that. Climate change is real and it is happening and it's affecting, our lives. And so I agree that if there's any way that we can increase the timeline on this, I would certainly support that. But I also want to be somewhat pragmatic and make sure that we're doing it correctly in something that is actually achievable and sustainable for us. Thank you for your work on it. Looking forward to continuing this.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Boysko. Delegate Watts.
Thank you, especially following on Mayor Rischel's and Senator Boysko's comments. There is an overemphasis on pitting transit against road capacity. The reality of this area outside of DC itself is Stream Valley development that has respected not crossing streams. Therefore, you don't have a neat and tidy grid network. You need road capacity to collect, to feed transit. And this totally ignores that the support of transit very often depends also on road capacity issues. The further that you go out from the core, the more this is true. And so on the fact of equity, regional equity, it really is focused inward and does not maintain the equity that is so important in NVTA's whole structure that we bring up in a number of other conversations. I would also add, as Senator Boysko alluded to, when you're looking at clean energy vehicles, the overemphasis on vehicle miles traveled is just not related. You want to reduce the greenhouse gas. Well, I'll get it out. But what I did like in the revised resolution was that it was per capita vehicle miles traveled. Therefore, you could divert 10,000 previous car drivers into transit, and your net as far as per capita could possibly still come out positive. But while I get into that, let me emphasize the impressive record 2 years ago, 2019, the express lanes, which is increased road capacity on 95. 55% of the people using those lanes are riding free because they're in HOV vehicles, carpools, van pools, express pools. So this is just another example of why we cannot pit and say no expanded road capacity as the only way that we should be addressing absolutely the extremely serious problem of climate change. And I guess the only other quick thing I'll throw in there, one of the major problems in energy efficient vehicles is the structure of charging stations that is so critical. Just like there's a gas station now so frequently, we've got to have that infrastructure, and there may certainly be, there should be an aspect of that in our plan to make sure that that reliability factor is addressed. I keep on saying then finally, I promise this is then finally, the phrase that says mobility disadvantaged populations are supposed to have emphasis. Well, you know, I think some people think that they're looking at a matter of income levels, but mobility disadvantage occurs in absolutely pockets throughout the region and exists as much for middle income management level as it does for the hourly support worker.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Watts. Mr. Snyder, I'm going to come back to you and have you speak almost second to last, sir. I'm going to go to Mr. Myers.
Thank you. I want to also thank Mr. Snyder for his work on this. I also am on the TPB. I believe that the action of the TPB was not just a platitudinous vote. There are the leadership in the entire Washington area is very dynamic. It's changing. We have a lot of new people on the scene, both in DC and in Maryland, as well as Virginia. And they're quite serious about this issue of climate change and air quality. And this is a classic example of the clashing of different policy objectives. And the raison d'etre of the NVTA in 2013, has to be somewhat reconsidered over the passage of time. We've been at this now statutorily. We're 8 years away, or 9 years from our organic statute, and from a point of view of funding projects, we're probably into our 7th or 8th year. And I would urge us as we try to grapple with these 2 points along a continuum, that we look at it through the lens of 10 and 20 and 30 years. And I don't know, I hear all the comments about electric vehicles and comparing one set of measurements to another. But looked at it through the lens of 20 or 30 years, the only way that this region, and a lot of us are not going to even be here at that point, myself included, but only way this region is going to be able to operate as a transportation through the lens of transportation in 20 or 30 years is with individual vehicles not being a primary way of getting from point A to point B. I realize that the political realities, more short term, are what we have to deal with all the time. But I do believe that we're going to have to look at the climate impact of all of the funds that we approve moving forward. And I think this is a good faith effort to try and get some coherence around these two somewhat different objectives. So I commend Mr. Snyder for his good faith effort to try and move this discussion forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers, I appreciate that. Ms. Rome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll try to be brief here. One of the points of emphasis that I would very much like to see as we discuss climate change mitigation deals with reduction in idling for existing commuting times, because until we get to a point where electric vehicles are replacing, in terms of majority, gas-powered vehicles, and until we get to a point where mass transit has significantly recovered from COVID so that we can either address, Madam Chair, your concern, as you mentioned earlier, about hitting, will we ever get to where we were, in the beginning of 2020 again, or can we even exceed that, where we saw in the data that was provided to us earlier, severe reductions in mbta, OmniRide, and Metro, for example. We have a long way to go, and so which means that for the foreseeable future, we're going to have gas-powered cars that are going to be on our primary, secondary, and interstate highways. So, and then we're going to have first mile, last mile issues to deal with, like Delegate Watts was talking about, in terms of how do you get to mass transit hubs, right? And I think that because we have so many existing residential developments that were built with cul-de-sacs as opposed to grids, these developments were not built with mass transit in mind. They were not built to be accommodating toward mass transit, which means that we're going to have to figure out how do we make those sort of designs workable for mass transit. So in the meantime, we need to have a reduction of idling. What causes idling? Traffic lights cause idling. Car accidents cause idling. Those are two of the main sources for just stuck congestion. And I think that an emphasis on innovative intersection designs and improving the existing roads that we do have need to be part of the conversation so that they are safer, quicker, and greener for everyone to drive on. So that's really the point of emphasis I want to make, is reduction of idling, because that is going to be very important, and it is important right now, and it's going to be like this for at least the next decade to come. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I associate myself with many of your comments, Ms. Rome. Mr. Faust.
Thank you very much. One thing I would say is, first of all, is that I'm really glad we're having this conversation. I think it's, we got challenges all about us, including transportation, but really we have one crisis that we got to deal with, and that's the climate. And so while I recognize there are lots of probably procedural and structural issues in terms of transitioning from the way we do business to doing business in a way that makes us leaders in not only delivering transportation, but in terms of dealing with the climate crisis. We've got to get there. So I'm glad Montgomery County brought this up. I'm really pleased with what I see Councilman Snyder has drafted. Again, nothing is ready for prime time. There's too many questions, too many issues that have to be addressed. But the fundamental point that we must make our transportation planning and our investments recognize that they can make a difference in the climate arena. I mean, it's just something we should have done a long time ago. It's something we can't wait to do in the future. We got to do it now.
All right, thank you. Mr. Wilson?
I guess I'll try to be brief here. I think we've somehow, from a process perspective, I have a lot of concerns about how this discussion is kind of playing out, because I feel like we're kind of stepping into the middle of another body's conversation. I think clearly we have input, and I think I'm certainly going to provide that input to our representative on the TPB from Alexandria. And I imagine everyone else will as well. And I think that's probably the appropriate way for us to provide input into this process. That being said, I share the urgency of kind of evolving our plans in a reasonable way to address the climate crisis. And notwithstanding some of the comments I've heard from some of my colleagues, it's like, this is not rocket science. We know, I mean, we know how to make progress on this stuff. We know how to measure it. The state, the federal government have been doing this for a while. We have been all doing this for a while in our local governments as well. So there's not a lot of mystery to what's going to move the needle in the transportation sector on climate. And I think the only question is how quickly we can adjust our plans to get there. And so I don't want to see us kind of devolve into a debate about what moves the needle. I think we know what moves the needle. So You know, I think for this discussion, I appreciate the work that Councilmember Snyder's done. I think it's a reasonable compromise that addresses what's currently on the table, as well as expresses the right amount of urgency for evolving our plans as we go forward. I think we all should provide input to our TPB members that represent those interests that we have here, but also making sure the operational concerns for the MBTA are addressed. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Crystal.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I would associate myself with Mayor Wilson's comments on process. I think to the extent I have a strongly held belief, I really don't think the authority should be getting involved in this one at the elected level. I think the staff level, Ms. Backman's been representing our interests and our comments and questions well. But the actual specifics of this resolution and what's happening at the TPB in this conversation, from what I understand in conversation with my own jurisdiction's TPB member, are deeply complicated between funding streams, between state and local tensions happening over in Maryland that I don't even profess to understand. And so I have a lot of confidence that between, Mr. Snyder, my own TPB rep, and others, that our interests can be pursued well by those who understand what's happening at the TPB table. Again, appreciate Ms. Backman raising these questions. They do affect the authority ultimately, but I would speak with a lot of caution, and I don't think anyone's proposed this tonight. If we were talking about a letter or resolution or anything like that from the authority, I don't think that's the right move here for the reasons Justin well described. I do want to take just maybe another 2 minutes and say something though, which is not getting involved in this particular complex regional bodies issues notwithstanding, I think that we need to heed the truth motivating this resolution. And I think Mr. Snyder talked about that in his proposal. And the point, best as I can understand it, that very much applies to us is that we cannot meet our climate goals as a region or as individual localities while continuing with business as usual when it comes to our land use planning and transportation planning. We cannot pretend that continuing to build low density housing where accessing transit along with all of the other essentials of life and commerce requires getting in a single occupancy vehicle and parking in a surface lot is somehow interchangeable or the same thing as transit-oriented development planning. We can't pretend, and I'm going to speak pretty honestly about our work here at NVTA, that funding roadway projects is interchangeable with funding transit projects when it comes to the goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reversing the climate change that is causing flooding in our region, to say nothing of the catastrophic consequences around our country and world. And I will say, and I will try to not be too pointed about this, but when we say that funding roadway expansions is a matter of racial equity, that flies in the face of study after study after study that tells us that Black and Latino communities in the US are exposed to so much more air pollution than they produce from activities like driving, and white Americans experience better air quality than the national average, even though our activities are actually causing most of the pollution around driving. And so, I'll get off my soapbox there, but I guess what I hope is, I hope this conversation, this very real clarion call to recognize that our status quo of transportation planning and land use planning is not compatible with our climate goals, spurs us to reflect on our own 6-year plan, our own long-range plannings. And one of the things that we often bring up and gesture at the authority is this idea that, because our enabling legislation requires us to look at congestion relief above all, that we can't make emissions reduction or transit-oriented development a more central criterion. And so, if it means actually starting to have that tough conversation with our General Assembly members about that enabling legislation, I hope that we're inspired to do it. So, I'll conclude there and to end where I started. I actually don't think that we should get involved in this TPB issue at all, but I do think that we should learn from what's happening there and try to reflect it in our own work. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Wheeler.
Last but not least, so I will take a juxtaposition of saying, as someone who sits on the TPB board, who sits in an outer still growing jurisdiction that doesn't have the access to the transit options that maybe some of the rest of you do, this is very alarming to us. I think it's important to realize that initially it was the electrification of cars that was sort of driving the plan for a reduction in greenhouse gases, and that has shifted because people want, for various reasons, to look at vehicle miles traveled. You know, for someone like out in Prince William County, you know, vehicle miles traveled because we don't have the access to some of the mass transit options. It's not a neutral arbiter of how you evaluate projects. Thank you, Councilmember Snyder, for putting together the proposed re-resolution. I really appreciate the work that he put into that. You know, the one issue I have is in the paragraph before the 4 issues, it says the line, the study is expected to lay out what specific actions the region's transportation sector must take, such as vehicle miles traveled reduction and converting vehicle fleet to cleaner fuel. I will just point out that the reduction of vehicle miles traveled for our area is almost an oxymoron as we continue to grow and suffer hardship from congested roads. And I'll just say that. I mean, I know it's not, no one wants to hear that. And so I would just suggest that, you know, there are different things in different regions that are important. And what I'm advocating for is because we don't have necessarily transit options, I think we should spend more money on electrification infrastructure in the outer areas that actually have to still use cars. And people balk at that, but like, oh, well, you know, there are other places that want electric infrastructure, but, you know, if we're still going to be driving our cars, please give us the, you know, the focus on the electrical infrastructure and have that as a priority. I'll just throw that there. Or I would love, you know, billions of dollars spent on some transit options. So this is a very, very complicated issue. Please know that we support the reduction of greenhouse gases in Prince William County fully. We've got a sustainability issue. We're putting a lot of money towards doing that. Our options are just less than other people, and I hope people appreciate that. So I'm saying it out loud.
Mr. Snyder, before I speak and come to you, I believe that Ms. Sinner from VDOT would also like to make a comment.
Thank you, Ms. Randall. Just a general comment as far as the Commonwealth. I understand that there is a letter that the Commonwealth is going to send the TPB as well, regards to specific issues. And to begin with, obviously the Commonwealth is also very supportive of the region's social equity and climate change efforts, you know, and that is something that we really take very seriously. The letter specifically is going to talk about 2 issues of importance to us. One is the integrity of the Visualize 2045, as explained by Ms. Backman, and its adoption before the end of 2022, so we avoid having a lapse in the plan that will affect federal action and how the region receives federal monies. And that doesn't only affect the regional significant projects, but also affects the day-to-day operations that we do that requires federal money, such as paving or such as operations and such as paying transit payments, you know, etc. So everything that is related to federal money and the actions by the feds, not just project development, would be impacted. So that is one of the reasons why we think it's very important to continue with the current process that began over a year ago. The other part that we touch based on is the constrained portion of the plan. The plan itself is constrained because each project needs to demonstrate as a whole, as a project as well as a plan, that the sponsors can fund the project and are willing to implement as well as maintain and operate whatever the improvement is in place. So we spent over probably a year with all of your staffs, you know, developing that financial plan that is updated every 4 years. So we started that process about probably a year ago for, you know, to bring this to the TPB board for a vote to start the air quality conformity analysis. And that vote is the one vote coming up in June. So we again try to advise the TPB to continue with that schedule as such. The second part is the scenario planning that is being proposed by Montgomery County. And we do support scenario planning in every event. is a very good tool, to plan for the future. However, we do advise that scenario planning needs to engage the jurisdictions and the member jurisdictions, because again, if the planning is to be viable, needs to be something that whoever are going to be the sponsors of submitting the investments will be able to support that. So just as a last item, we believe that reviewing or measuring reduction of greenhouse gases per project specific is probably not as effective as reviewing the entire network. There are strategies and other things that can supplement or offset some of the increase of BMT or greenhouse emissions. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I understand that our secretary is going to be submitting a letter highlighting some of those items.
Thank you, Ms. Senator. So, Mr. Stein, I'm going to give you the last word because I think you deserve the last word. So I'll say a couple things first. First, I'm going to respectfully disagree with Ms. Crystal and Mr. Wilson. I do believe that the MBTA should have a voice in this for a myriad of reasons, least of all the fact that we have projects in the hopper already and it could affect how those are funded, but also a larger reason, and that is when we're talking about something that is this important and impacts the region to this degree, this is one of these things that I don't think should be held to just one body, because it will impact every single person. Well, really every single person in the region. And I think that this is an issue of the TPB, but it not just an issue of that board. And that I would actually advocate us taking a position or sending a letter. And so I'm going to respectfully disagree with my friends, Ms. Crystal and Mr. Wilson, on that. I also want us to be really careful, because not only can this issue kind of pit transit against road, it could also pit things like people inside the Beltway, the people outside the Beltway. We want to be, really, really careful about that. I don't think we want to get to that place. I don't think that there's one person on the authority or who doesn't believe that greenhouse gas emissions is an issue, that doesn't believe that climate change is an issue, that doesn't believe it's the issue probably of our lifetime, and the issue that will most impact our children and our children's children. I don't think there's a person here that doesn't want that denies climate change or the greenhouse gas emissions are how to impact that. I think the rub is how to take care of what will happen in the future while still seeing to the people who are here right now. Right. And so, we can be just very future focused and talk about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and we should be future focused. At the same time, we have people right now and for the next 5 years and 10 years and 15 years who are going to need to get in cars to get to transit, who are going to need to get to cars to get to the hospital, to get to their jobs, to get to where they have to go. They're going to need to. And whether and as Ms. Wheeler said, the goal is to may possibly have as fewer cars being combustible gas engines and more cars being electric vehicles would be one goal. But we cannot act like that tomorrow we're going to blink our eyes and we're going to be the Jetsons, and all of a sudden we're going to be flying around in electric vehicles. And so there has to be a discussion of how do we transition from one to the other while still trying to decrease greenhouse gas emissions, while still trying to take care of the world we leave our kids, while still taking care of the world that our parents are living in now. And that's kind of a balance that is important to talk about and not easy to do. Miss Wheeler also makes the point of, when you live in the largest county in Virginia is Prince William County. The second largest county in Virginia is Loudoun County. When you live in counties that large or people live out that far, it is unrealistic to think that for the next 5, 10, 15 years, we're not going to have to, we're not going to have roads people have to drive on if for no other reason but to get to transit. And so we have so many things to consider, and these are such important conversations that will reach well into the future. I will also say that I really do, Mr. Snyder, what you have tried to accomplish, I think, is, we have read a lot of things from the TPV and other sources. I really do appreciate how much time you have spent. The only reason I wouldn't want to say we'll endorse something tonight is because the way my body works is when we have these meetings, these regional meetings, I take these items back to our to my body, to the board, and have those discussions and get some ideas and get some thoughts about those things. And so I'd rather, if Mr. Snyder, if we're going to do anything, I'd rather wait till the next meeting where people have had time to go back to their local bodies and talk about this. All of us, of course, have TPB members on our local bodies, but to have more conversations with them would also be very helpful. I think there's so much to consider in this discussion, and this is maybe one of the most important discussions we're going to have, because this is not a discussion of can we get to the mall. This is a discussion of what our children's future will look like and what earth we're going to leave them. And so while also, as I said, also thinking what does it look like right now, and how do we get people around right now. And so I don't know that if they're hard answers, but they're such important answers to get right, I believe. And so hopefully, Mr. Snyder, if we do nothing tonight with your proposal, that would be all right. But I think this has been a really helpful conversation, and I will give you the last word, sir.
Well, thank you. It has been a very helpful conversation, a very positive conversation, and conversations like this that will help us move together in the direction that we need to go in the short term, medium term, and long term. So there's no question about the value of this, and to the extent I could play even a tiny role in that, I'm very pleased to do that. A couple realities seem to be the case. Both resolutions proposed that we've seen so far from the Montgomery County member would apparently, as a practical matter, jeopardize the projects that have been put forward. And that's a problem. The second thing is we'll know a lot more about what we actually ought to do when the TPB study of climate change mitigation is hopefully concluded in December. And three, we all know that climate change is a major issue. Transportation has a role to play, and I think we all want it to play that role. So what I would just suggest going forward, if anyone wants to pick up the pen and work with this, or work with the Montgomery County resolution, or however you want to do it, but it seems to me it needs to do what I've tried to do here, which are really two fundamental things, which is recognize that projects have been worked through the process. They are multimodal. Actually, the plan is better than prior plans, but falls short on the climate change goals that the region has set, but that we should move forward because those projects have gone through a very democratic and very careful process. But secondly, we do something that commits us collectively and individually to actually approach and address the climate change issues, likely based upon the much more specific data than we have now that we will get in December. So with that, I'd invite anyone to pick up the pen and just consider this conversation an incredibly valuable conversation for all of us. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you. And so as I said, there'll be no actions taken tonight, and we'll take this discussion up. And the nice thing is next month we'll be in person when we have this discussion, which will be an easier way to do it, to be honest, in person. And then after that we have an August break, which we all need and deserve an August break. So
could I make one more thing?
Absolutely, Mr. Snyder.
Because the TPB meeting is going to occur next week, where this is, I don't know of any way to delay an action on it. Maybe that's what comes out. I don't know. But let's assume that's not the case. Any of the TPB representatives that want to get together, draft something else, come up with additional ideas, I would urge that to occur. Anyway, thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to interrupt.
I have a feeling this is maybe one of the most watched NVTA meetings in a while, to be quite honest. I have a feeling there are a lot of people's eyes on us right now, Mr. Snyder. So thank you, thank you. So we're going to move to the Executive Director's Report, Ms. Backman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only thing that I will add is next Friday, June 18th, is MBTA Day in the town of Hillsborough. From 11 to 2 p.m. They are really excited and hoping that current and past and maybe some future authority members will be present for that celebration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well, that was actually in my No Kidding Chair's comments. If you've never come to Hillsborough before, it's a good time. It is a good time. Hillsborough has, no kidding, 112 people that live in Hillsborough. But I am telling you, there is not a better party in Northern Virginia than in Hillsborough. So if you haven't done that, please come out to Hillsborough. You'll have a lot of fun. I also want to say in my chair comments that congratulations to Mr. Wilson, to Justin Wilson, who just won a primary. And we'll have an election in November, but won his primary to maintain his chair seat, and wanted handily, I might add. Justin, we give you a hard time just because it's fun to give you a hard time, and you give us so much to work with, but but you are a joy to serve with, and so congratulations.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back.
And finally, I'll just say what I've said already is that this will be our last virtual meeting. Thank gosh. I will miss some things in the virtual meeting, like seeing Jennifer Boysko's cat on the virtual meeting all the time. I guess I won't see that anymore. Watching everybody's background. Katie Crystal has the best background of anybody. I don't know if it's even real. It may be just a background she made and put up there, but I'll miss seeing Katie's background. But gosh, do I look forward to seeing all of your faces in person. I don't think most people have even met Mayor Davis Younger in person because we've been in COVID ever since she's been elected. And so it's going to be just a joy to see everybody again. And so our next meeting will be in person. That is all I have for my chair comments. And if anyone else has anything for the good of the body, let it be known. Otherwise, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
See y'all.